Okay, here we go. Tatiana, Truth Ball in Search of Goof. I am putting together a video today to address the issue with abuse, domestic abuse calls increasing, spiking due to the Covid-19 pandemic. I put on my notes to do a video for my followers last week to do that today, and today I believe that the United Nations acknowledged that there is a major problem going on with domestic abuse. So I'm gonna actually make this video for sharing to any shelter or organization that is coordinating the funding around the marketing campaign to decrease the domestic violence in the United States and around the world. If it can be shared. If you can share it, please share it. I start all my videos, I've got my notes up here that I'm going to be tracking. I start all my videos stating I'm not a doctor. The channel, Truth Ball in Search of Goof, was created as a personal coping strategy and to validate other abuse victims and potential abuse victims that were looking for videos to validate what they were feeling. The number one reason we get into domestic abuse relationships is that our gut instincts are not validated. So this video, I'm hoping, makes it to some of the people who are going to be coordinating the marketing campaigns, because if the mindset of the victim is not validated, that marketing campaign will not work. I think the article I was reading today, some of the marketing campaigns that happened were atrocious. For example, the one in Malaysia. Okay, so before I get started, if you are in an abusive relationship and you have to memorize the number, the National Domestic Abuse Hotline number is 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-7233. I'm going to give you what I believe is going on, why we're seeing the spike in domestic abuse calls. I'm going to give you 3 quick rundowns of my own personal experience with what I have observed, and conclude with my personal suggestions. If you are a domestic abuse survivor, this channel was created over 3 years ago. So if you are a follower of this page and you got an alert and you are a survivor, I'm asking you to send this video to whatever shelter or law enforcement authority assisted you during that process. And I'm asking you to share it with your own suggestions. I think that the failure in the domestic violence marketing campaigns on how to help victims seek help is that many of those people have not actually experienced domestic violence themselves and do not understand what control the abuser has on the victim's mind. Only those who have actually been through abusive relationships and survived have the knowledge of what it's actually like. I have gone through training and I can observe how the training is wonderful and effective, but it does not replace the expertise of someone who has lived it and survived it. So those of you who have survived it are experts on this issue, and you need to behave as experts. Take the advice that you have and send it to whoever can affect the marketing campaigns. COVID-19 spreads. What do we have? it doubles every 3 days in the worst case places. And we are seeing doubling, tripling of domestic violence calls. So this is the time for you as a domestic abuse survivor to share this information or your information. Okay, so my assessment about what's going on and why the numbers are spiking on calls is those of us who are very familiar with the process and the games that narcissists play. Phase 1 of an abusive relationship is called love bombing. It sounds like a violent term because later on it's violent, more like a bouncing Betty. Okay? Love bombing is overwhelming the person, the victim, with a sense of being loved. Phase 2 is isolate the victim. This is very important, and I believe why the spike is happening right now. Phase 2 of an abusive relationship is to isolate the victim from friends and family who will validate what the person is going through. People who are surrounded by friends and family that love them and say, you deserve to be treated better than that, are the ones who pull a potential victim away from an abusive relationship. I am in favor of the stay-at-home order. However, from a domestic violence standpoint, the stay-at-home order has put all domestic violence relationships into phase 2. All of them. Every single domestic violence relationship on the planet is in phase 2 of isolate the victim. The victim cannot get validation. Their contact with the world is controlled. And that narcissist has full reign to do whatever they want to do to the victim. There's no witnesses of what's being done to them, and there's no help. We need to make sure that all marketing money that is going to go towards marketing to domestic violence victims is effective, and that there is a system in place to receive those victims immediately. If we are on a stay-at-home order, I believe that personally we need to have a particular set of executive orders about how to deal with domestic violence victims. All of their rights to freedom have been taken away. Not all, but you know what I'm saying. Their movement and communication is limited right now. Personally, I believe that all domestic violence calls that are responded to by police need to have the victim put into the system. And I'll describe that system. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. I hope that the people in charge who can get this can work out the kinks with domestic violence shelters who are very familiar with the mentality of what an abuse victim is struggling with, and are also very, very familiar with the manipulative behavior of when you don't know who the actual victim is, and also that the victim often exhibits the same type of manipulative behavior as the abuser, because manipulative behavior is consistently the only behavior that's okay. That's why it is so difficult when those cops show up and both people have hit each other and they can't tell who's the abuser and who's the victim. Victims are allowed abusive behavior back. Dysfunctional behavior is approved of. It takes a very long time as a victim to break free from dysfunctional communication. I hope that made sense. All y'all who've subscribed to my channel, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. And a lot of those who've been trained know what I'm talking about. So So this is who I'm hoping that this video gets to, is the people who actually understand what I'm talking about, because I'm not going to take any more time to explain it. Here we go. Number one, and this is going to be my oddball perception, my truth ball in search of goof perception. Animal shelters having a network and a system for how to foster the pets of abuse victims will greatly decrease domestic violence. Many, many, many domestic violence victims stay in the home that they are in because domestic abuse shelters will not take the pets. And they are very well aware that if they leave the pets, that the pets will be killed or abused in retaliation for the person leaving. I know that because that's what I lived. Many abusers want the person to get rid of the pets. I recommend that all animal shelters pay very close attention to who is giving their pet up for adoption right now. As a child, we were taken very often to the shelter. One of the times we took a kitten, hid that kitten. It was a child, it was probably 10 years old. We hid that kitten successfully in that shelter for the week or so that we were there. As soon as my mother went back to the abuser, in the car on the way home, that abuser took the cat and threw it out of the window on the freeway. I have been in an abusive relationship where the abuser intentionally let the dogs out. I know that many people have pets right now, and the abuser is going to intentionally hurt that animal. That's only one aspect of abusive relationships, but I do believe that this lack of coordination between animal shelters and domestic violence shelters is a huge deterrent to people being willing to take themselves and their children out of an abusive relationship. Coming back to my notes, let's see. Legislation, the boyfriend laws and all that kind of gun stuff, that's not going to work right now. People are not able to go to the courthouses to say, my boyfriend has a gun and he's threatening to kill me and the kids. That doesn't work. Something else needs to be come up with. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm just saying it's not going to work. The rough concept that I have builds upon what many domestic violence shelters already do. I'm just hoping that whoever gets this actually knows what I'm talking about. Most people do in this realm of crisis, of domestic violence, do understand on average it takes someone 7 times of leaving the abuser to stick with it. That person has to leave 7 times. And those people who, like myself, who left and went back and left and went back and left and went back, that each time you return, the violence increases. And that's usually what ends up leading to the final leaving of the relationship or the killing of the victim. We know statistically that when the victim tries to leave is when the statistics escalate, that victim is murdered. many shelters have a no contact agreement that has to be agreed to in order for the person to go to the shelter. That means they take your cell phone and you can't communicate with anybody. Because during those first few weeks, the head is spinning with the love bombing that happened, the isolation that happened, so you no longer have a true concept of what the world is actually like or that people care. And it's going to be much harder to convince people that the world is a loving place during this COVID-19 crisis. This is an extreme hurdle to get over. So my concept, my politically incorrect concept, is something like, if the police are called and someone is obviously a victim, they automatically go into the system. The pets are pulled and put into foster care. The children are pulled, the mother or the father is pulled and put into the system of 30 days no contact. If that is part of the marketing campaign, the abuser will not abuse the victim, because they know that if a neighbor calls the police, they will lose control over the victim. The victim will be pulled into a system where the abuser cannot contact them. This will require a heightened level of sanitation at the abuse shelters, because I personally recommend that those people who are, during an executive order, pulled and then relocated to another state. Because as a child, the abuser knew where we were. In our community, the abuser knew where the shelter was and was able to contact the victim, my mother, every time. It's not perfect. It's quite draconian and kind of sounds abusive, unless you've been in an abusive relationship and understand what's going on in the head of that abuse victim. Those who work in shelters do understand that it takes a while to deprogram the victim. And boyfriend laws ain't gonna cut it. So I hope the pros can take what I'm saying and turn it into something that works. Asking an abuser to be nice is not gonna cut it. You need to figure out how to make it clear to the abuser that if the police are called, they are going to lose control over the victim. Control the abuser. We have an executive order forcing us to stay in our homes. So I'm recommending that somebody out there think very smart about how to control an abuser. That the ramifications of abuse will be swift and sure and without apology. These are the things I recommend as well. A massive campaign of contact information for local shelters. A massive campaign via social media. Via social media, where the campaign goes into the feed of the abuse victims and they do not have to look for the information, as abusers do track where the victim is looking on their computers. The victims are being stalked. Their computer behavior is being tracked. They will be retaliated against for searching, and they are in the home of an abuser who will have access to their information. Most victims do not know that they need to delete their history or how to delete their history. It needs to be put in the feed. In the feed where the person does not have to interact with it. So there's no documentation tracking that the post was interacted with. Local shelters need money to do Facebook campaigns to put their contact information into the feed of their local areas. Again, animal shelters must partner with domestic abuse violence shelters. There must be a system that the victims are aware of where their animals can be sent. My recommendation specifically on that is a 30-day no contact rule. Once they get put into the domestic violence shelter, there is 30 days of zero contact with friends, family, anybody, because that abuser does go to the friends and family to convince the victim to go back. I have lived through it. I have lived through leaving and the trauma of leaving, and then the next trauma of having my friends convince me to go back, and I go back and the violence increases. That 30-day rule is at many shelters for a reason. They're very manipulative. I recommend once that domestic violence abuse victim has been put in a shelter, that the foster care volunteers at the animal shelters have a 90-day rule. 90 days. Foster care volunteers agree to 90 days before the animal can be returned to the owner. The agreement is that the foster care provider takes the animal for 90 days. That is 3 30-day periods. That gives enough time for the abuse victim who is so enmeshed in the dysfunction that after 30 days, if they return to the abuser, they still can't get their pet back. They have to, 90 days later, be out of the relationship, relocated somewhere away from the abuser. This is my other politically incorrect strategy, which worked for me. There needs to be some form of a campaign about gray rock. And I am speaking directly to those survivors and those people who run domestic violence shelters who understand how gray rock works. Gray rock escalates the violence until it makes the violence go away. Personally, gray rock is the #1 strategy to survive an abusive relationship when the victim can't leave. When they can't leave, the feed, the narcissist's feed, needs to be filled in a safe way. I have done this strategy myself, and only those who have survived this understand what I'm saying and are smarter than me and know how to turn this into a marketing campaign or train the people at the National Domestic Violence Hotline on how to hear or suggest or whatever is legal. If the abuse victim cannot leave, the narcissist needs their feed. I personally recommend, because this is how I survived, is choosing the strategy that the victim pretends hurts so that the narcissist releases that energy in a manner that the victim can survive. For example, I survived by being upset about what we had to eat. that lets the narcissist argue with me and keeps them from doing other things, such as hurting my pets. That is a mega advanced strategy that most victims won't understand. That is for victims who are thoroughly aware that they are in an abusive relationship and can't leave. Choose the feed. Choose what the narcissist gets fed. I don't know how to do that marketing campaign. I just know that I survived with it. All right. I think I got everything out. You don't have to agree with me. I just know that there's a major problem. There's a major problem, and I was thinking about it last week. And those who know, truly know how to survive a relationship, an abusive relationship, need to be victors right now. You need to be victors. If you don't agree with what I'm saying, that's fine. But reach out to whoever helped you and tell them what you think that marketing money should be spent on and how to reach victims. Think about what you needed and how you could have gotten to it. This entire channel was created because I did not have a channel like this to survive. You have ideas. Make sure that you go to whoever helped you, or your law enforcement around you, or up at the government, whoever's going to be distributing that marketing money, and let them know this is your idea, because someone somewhere is going to track the incoming suggestions and hopefully make a wise decision with that information. Malaysia telling women to not be naggy, that ain't gonna work. We need to figure out very quickly how to put abusers in check. Thank you. If you can share this post to anyone. Thank you if you are in a position to share your suggestions. I'm asking you, for other victims, for you to suck up the courage and for you to figure out who you can send your suggestions to. Okay? I miss you all. Much love.